My name is Kethral, and I am what you might call blessed. Blessed with superior Veltari genetics, blessed with 3 centuries of combat experience, and blessed with the honor of instructing at the most prestigious military academy in known space. The Galactic Combat Academy on Nexus 7 Station, where only the elite of the elite earn their stripes. Or at least, that used to be the case. You see, some bureaucratic genius in the Galactic Council decided it would be culturally enriching to allow primitives from backwater worlds to participate in our sacred training programs, and by primitives I mean humans. Those soft, pink, squishy creatures from that nightmare ball of death they call Earth. Oh, excuse me. Deathworld is apparently the technical term now. How dramatic. The first human to grace our halls was this tiny creature named Maya Torres. When she stepped off the transport shuttle, I nearly burst out laughing. She couldn't have been more than 5.5 feet tall, maybe 130 pounds soaking wet. Her skin looked like it would tear if you breathed on it too hard, and those ridiculous little arms, honestly, I've seen more muscle mass on a Zephyrian hatchling. "This is our great human warrior," I muttered to Instructor Velcan, trying not to snort with amusement. The other species weren't exactly impressed either. The Kronathi cadets, towering at 8 feet each with their natural armor plating, took one look at Maya and started placing bets on how many seconds she'd last in basic conditioning. The Zephyrians, with their elegant 4 arms and natural grace, whispered among themselves about whether humans even qualified as sentient. And don't get me started on the flex. Those crystalline beings can literally reshape their bodies at will, and they were questioning how something so fixed could possibly adapt to combat scenarios. "Perhaps we should prepare the medical bay," suggested Instructor Thex Mole, his mandibles clicking with barely contained mirth. "Well, I doubt their primitive medicine has prepared them for real training injuries." I nodded sagely. After all, what could we expect from a species that probably still used projectile weapons and chemical propulsion? The human would learn quickly that the galaxy operated on entirely different standards than whatever mud pit conflicts they were used to back home. How gloriously wrong I was about to be. Maya's first day was, quite frankly, a comedy show. She walked into the main training hall wearing what I can only describe as primitive fabric coverings, cotton, I believe they called it. Meanwhile, our Kronathi cadets strutted around in their natural chitinous armor that could deflect plasma bolts, and the Zephyrians glided past in their bioengineered combat skins that adapted to environmental threats in real time. The snickering started immediately. "Is that really supposed to be our competition?" wheezed Gorth A.K., a particularly large Kronathi whose shoulder spikes alone were taller than Maya's entire head. I could accidentally step on it. "Don't be cruel," Gorth A.K. chimed in Silenth, a Zephyrian whose lower 2 arms were casually bench-pressing what looked like a small shuttle engine. "Maybe it's here for administrative duties?" I watched Maya survey the room with those peculiar little eyes of hers, and honestly, my first thought was medical concern. Her bone structure looked so delicate, so breakable. Those spindly little limbs couldn't possibly generate any meaningful force. Her muscle definition was practically non-existent compared to even our weakest cadets. Hell, her entire torso was smaller than my forearm. The Academy had gone through considerable trouble to accommodate our special guest. They'd installed gravity dampeners around her quarters because apparently standard galactic gravity might crush her fragile skeleton. The cafeteria had been stocked with primitive organic compounds because her digestive system couldn't handle proper synthetic nutrients. They'd even modified the training equipment with safety protocols to prevent accidental death by anything really. Instructor Keth Rao called Director Hexmoth over the comm system. "Please ensure the human receives appropriate guidance. We can't afford an interspecies incident on day 1. For appropriate guidance. Right. Like explaining to a hatchling why it shouldn't try to breathe vacuum. But here's the thing that bothered me most about Maya Torres. She stood there, surrounded by beings who could literally tear her apart without trying, and she seemed calm. No trembling, no wide-eyed terror, No desperate attempts to make herself smaller and less noticeable. Just this quiet, steady presence that I mistook for either complete ignorance of her situation or some kind of primitive shock response. "Poor little thing," whispered Instructor Velkan. "It probably doesn't even understand what it's gotten itself into." The other instructors had started a betting pool by midday. Instructor Thex Mole gave her 3 hours before a panic attack. Velkan was generous with a full day. I put my credits on 6 hours, figuring she'd last until the first physical assessment and then break down crying when she realized she couldn't even lift the warm-up weights. Looking back now, with my jaw still clicking when the weather changes, I realize we were all catastrophically wrong about one crucial detail. That wasn't fear or ignorance we were seeing in Maya's eyes. It was patience. The first combat drills were supposed to be simple. Basic stance work, fundamental strikes, elementary defensive positions. You know, the kind of remedial exercises we use to weed out the truly hopeless recruits before they waste everyone's time. I demonstrated the standard Veltari combat stance, feet positioned for optimal balance, arms extended to maximize reach and leverage, center of gravity lowered for stability. Perfect form, honed over centuries of tradition. Now, cadets, observe proper technique, and that's when Maya decided to show us her version of proper technique. Instead of mimicking my stance, she dropped into this bizarre crouch that looked like she was about to fall over. Her arms hung loose at her sides, completely relaxed, while her weight shifted constantly from foot to foot in this twitchy, erratic pattern that made absolutely no sense from a biomechanical standpoint. "Torres," I called out, trying to keep the irritation from my voice. "Perhaps you missed the demonstration. The stance requires rigid structural alignment, not whatever that is." She looked up at me with those unsettling little eyes and said, "I'm adapting it for human physiology, sir." Adapting it? Adapting it. 3,000 years of refined Veltari combat methodology, and this primitive creature thinks she can just improve it? "Very well," I said through gritted teeth. "Let's see how your adaptation performs in practice." I paired her with Zon Keth, one of our more patient Kronathi cadets. Poor fellow probably thought he was doing charity work, going easy on the fragile alien. The exercise was simple basic strike sequences, nothing fancy, just testing reaction time and form. What happened next still makes my head hurt. Zon Keth threw a textbook straight punch, perfectly executed, aimed at Maya's center mass. Should have been an easy block or dodge for anyone with proper training. Instead, Maya did something that violated every principle of combat physics I'd ever learned. She twisted sideways, dropped under the punch, spun around Zon Keth's extended arm, and somehow ended up behind him before he could even register what happened. The whole sequence took maybe 2 seconds, and it looked like she was dancing rather than fighting. "What in the 7 hells was that supposed to be?" I demanded. "Capoeira mixed with some basic jiu-jitsu," Maya replied, as if that explained anything. The other cadets started paying attention after that. Sil Nth, our star Zephyrian student, volunteered to spar next. Surely 4 arms would be enough to handle whatever weird monkey business the human was pulling. Wrong again. Maya flowed around Sil Nth's attacks like water around rocks. Every time a strike came her way, she bent and twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible with a rigid skeletal structure. She'd slip punches by margins so thin I could barely see them, then respond with these quick, snapping strikes that somehow found gaps in defenses that shouldn't have existed. "Her technique is completely sloppy," I muttered to Velkan. "No proper form, no discipline, no adherence to fundamental principles." But here's what really ground my scale: she was winning. Not just surviving, not just holding her own through dumb luck. She was systematically dismantling every cadet I threw at her using methods that made no tactical sense whatsoever. My prize student, Vextharian Amiel, lasted exactly 37 seconds before Maya had him tied up in some kind of submission hold that looked more like interpretive dance than combat technique. That's when it hit me. This wasn't incompetence or primitive flailing. This was something else entirely. Something that made my carefully structured, time-tested methods look inadequate. My pride was taking a serious beating, and we hadn't even gotten to the real training yet. By the third week, I'd had enough. Enough of watching my carefully trained cadets get schooled by this tiny primitive. Enough of the whispers in the instructor's lounge about how maybe our methods weren't as superior as we thought. And definitely enough of Maya's insufferably calm demeanor every time she pulled off another impossible victory. So I decided to end this nonsense once and for all. "Zex Rin," I called out during our advanced sparring session. "You're up." Now, Zex Rin wasn't just any Chronothi cadet. This beast stood 9 feet tall, weighed roughly 600 pounds of solid muscle and natural armor, and had reflexes that could track hypersonic projectiles. He'd been bred specifically for combat on a world where the gravity would crush most species flat. His claws could rend titanium, his hide could deflect energy weapons, and his combat record was absolutely spotless. Surely this would put the human back in her proper place. "Full contact," I announced, ignoring the concerned looks from the other instructors. "Standard Academy rules. Victory by submission or incapacitation." Maya stepped onto the mat without a word, looking like a child next to Zex Rin's towering form. The size difference was so absurd that several cadets actually laughed. I'll admit, even I felt a moment of satisfaction at the visual. "Begin," I commanded. Zex Rin opened with a classic Chronothi charge, a devastating straight-line assault that had flattened every opponent he'd ever faced. His massive fist came down like a meteor strike, aimed directly at Maya's head. She wasn't there when it landed. Instead, she'd somehow rolled between his legs, hopped up behind him, and before anyone could blink, she had wrapped herself around his back like some kind of parasitic vine. Her arms snaked around his throat, while her legs locked around his torso, and suddenly this 9-foot killing machine was stumbling around the mat like a drunken flex at a fertility celebration. How is she?" Zex Rin gasped, clawing frantically at the tiny figure clinging to him. Maya's response was to tighten whatever hold she had on him. Within seconds, Zex Rin's movements became sluggish. Within 10 seconds, his eyes started rolling back. Within 15 seconds, my prize student, my most formidable cadet, collapsed unconscious on the training mat. The silence in that hall was deafening. Maya stood up, brushed herself off, and had the audacity to check on Zex Rin's breathing before casually walking back to her starting position. "Blood choke," she explained to nobody in particular. "Cuts off circulation to the brain. He'll be fine in a minute or two." That's when I lost it. I stormed onto that mat with 3 centuries of wounded pride driving every step. This primitive, this barely evolved ape from some backwater mud ball, had just humiliated the finest warrior in my class using techniques that belonged in a back-alley brawl, though not an elite military academy. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Torres?" I snarled, towering over her diminutive form. "This is a respectable institution, not some primitive gladiator pit where you can show off your dirty fighting tricks." She looked up at me with those unreadable human eyes. "I was sparring, sir. Following academy rules for victory conditions." "Don't give me that innocent act," I snapped. "You're making a mockery of everything this academy stands for, flaunting around with your undisciplined street fighting, embarrassing cadets who've trained their entire lives to be here." "I'm just doing my best, sir. Just doing her best. Just doing her best." As if casually dismantling the most elite warriors in known space was some kind of accident. As if she wasn't perfectly aware of the chaos she was causing to our established order. "Your best?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Your best is disrupting centuries of proven methodology with your primitive flailing." Maya's expression didn't change. Still that same calm, patient look that had been driving me insane for weeks. "I apologize if my techniques seem unorthodox, sir. I'm adapting to the training as instructed." That did it. That absolutely did it. My hand moved before my brain could stop it. The slap echoed through the training hall like a plasma cannon discharge, and for one brief, satisfying moment, I thought I'd finally put this arrogant little primitive in her place. I was about to learn just how catastrophically wrong that assumption was. The slap connected with Maya's cheek with a satisfying crack that echoed through the training hall. For exactly 0.03 seconds, I felt vindicated. Finally, I'd shown this primitive creature what happened when you disrespected your betters. Then the world exploded into pain. I never saw her move. One moment Maya was standing there, absorbing my disciplinary action like a proper student should. The next moment, something hit my jaw with the force of a hypersonic freight transport, and my entire skull decided to relocate itself to somewhere in the vicinity of the next solar system. The sound, oh, the sound. That wet, grinding crack as my mandible separated from the rest of my face was like listening to a structural support beam snap under load. Except the structural support beam was my face, and the load was apparently one tiny human fist moving at velocities that shouldn't have been biologically possible. I found myself airborne briefly, a new and deeply unpleasant experience before gravity reminded me that Veltari were not designed for flight. I hit the training mat with all the grace of a disabled cargo hauler, and that's when the real fun began. My jaw, you see, had decided to take up permanent residence somewhere around my left ear. Every attempt to close my mouth resulted in bone fragments grinding against each other in ways that made my vision white out with pain. Breathing became an adventure in creative anatomy. And speaking? Well, let's just say the sounds coming out of my throat belonged in a medical horror documentary. The entire training facility had gone dead silent. Not the respectful quiet of attentive students, but the stunned, uncomfortable silence that follows when someone witnesses something so fundamentally wrong that their brains need a moment to process what just happened. Maya stood exactly where she'd been before, her stance unchanged, her expression still that same calm, patient look that had been driving me insane. The only difference was a slight red mark on her cheek where my hand had connected, and she was absently rubbing her knuckles like she'd just finished a light workout. I was writhing on the ground, making sounds that would embarrass a wounded swamp beast, and she looked mildly inconvenienced. Instructor Keth Rao. Velkan's voice cut through my pain-induced haze as he rushed onto the mat. By the 7 moons, what happened? Through tears of agony, I watched Maya tilt her head slightly, as if considering how to explain a complex mathematical concept to a particularly slow child. Reflex training, she said simply. Reflex training? I tried to ask what in the burning hells that was supposed to mean, but all that came out was a sound like a malfunctioning waste recycling unit. Instructor Thexmol had arrived with a medical kit, his mandibles clicking frantically as he examined my relocated jaw. "This is a complete dislocation," he announced. "How did this happen?" Maya blinked those unsettling human eyes. "He struck me, so I struck back. Basic reflex conditioning from childhood." Childhood, wheezed Instructor Hexnolar, who'd materialized from somewhere. What kind of childhood training involves strikes like that? "Standard playground defense protocols," Maya replied, as if this explained everything. "Most human children learn basic counter-strike techniques by age 7 or 8. You know someone hits you, you hit them back harder. Pretty universal concept where I'm from." The medical team was now attempting to manipulate my jaw back into its proper location, which involved levels of pain I didn't know existed in this universe. Through my suffering, I heard Maya continue her casual explanation. The response was automatic, really. Threat assessment, target acquisition, neutralization. This takes about 0.02 of a second once the reflex kicks in. She paused, studying my writhing form with what might have been scientific interest. Though I probably could have pulled the punch a bit. "Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. You're saying this was just instinct?" Velkan asked, his voice strangled. "Well, yeah, I mean, what did you expect? Someone hits you in the face, you defend yourself. That's just basic survival programming." Maya shrugged, a gesture that somehow made her look even smaller and more harmless. "We learn it pretty early on Earth. Has to be automatic, or you don't last long." The medical team had managed to get my jaw roughly back where it belonged, though it felt like they'd used a plasma torch and a crowbar to do it. As they loaded me onto a transport gurney, I caught Maya's eye one more time. She gave me what I can only describe as a polite, apologetic smile. "I hope you feel better soon, Instructor Kethral. And thank you for the lesson. Thank you for the lesson." As if she hadn't just demonstrated that everything I thought I knew about combat, about strength, about the natural order of the universe was completely and utterly wrong. That was the moment I realized we weren't dealing with a primitive species at all. We were dealing with something far more terrifying. The medical bay's regeneration chamber hummed softly as it worked to rebuild my shattered jaw. Through the transparent aluminum walls, I could see Maya sitting in the waiting area, calmly explaining human child rearing practices to a growing crowd of horrified instructors and cadets. "So dodgeball is basically target practice?" asked Velkan, his voice pitched higher than usual. "Sort of," Maya replied, as if discussing the weather. "You throw these rubber balls at children as hard as you can, and they have to dodge or catch them. If you get hit, you're eliminated. Great for building reflexes and pain tolerance." The medical technician working on my face paused mid-procedure. "They do this for fun?" "Oh yeah, it's super popular. Though some schools banned it because apparently it was too intense for some kids." Maya shrugged. "We also played this game called Red Rover, where you'd form two lines and try to break through a human chain by running at it full speed." I watched Instructor Thexmal's mandibles click nervously. "And the chain holders? They'd lock arms and try to stop you. Usually resulted in someone getting clotheslined or knocked unconscious." "Good times." Maya smiled fondly at the memory. "Oh, and there was King of the Hill, where 30 kids would fight over control of a small elevated area. Last one standing wins." The Zephyrian cadet who'd been listening started turning a sickly green color. "How many of your young survived to adulthood?" "Most of them, actually. Though everyone had a few broken bones by the time they hit puberty." "That's totally normal, though." "Totally normal?" I tried to speak but only managed a muffled groan through my bandages. "What about formal education?" pressed Director Hexmoth, who'd arrived to investigate the incident. "Surely your academic institutions were more civilized?" Maya tilted her head thoughtfully. "Well, there was this thing called gym class where they'd make us climb ropes, do something called military-style calisthenics, and play full-contact sports. Football was pretty brutal, basically organized warfare with protective gear." "Protective gear suggests awareness of danger," Velkan said, hopefully. "Yeah, concussions were a real problem. And broken ribs, torn ligaments, that sort of thing. But it built character." Maya paused. "Oh, and we had this activity called wrestling where you'd try to pin another human to the ground using only physical force. Teachers encouraged it." The room had gone completely silent, except for the hum of medical equipment. "Let me understand this correctly," Director Hexmoth said slowly. "Your species trains its children for combat from early childhood, considers physical violence a normal part of development, and treats potentially fatal activities as recreational entertainment?" "When you put it like that, it sounds kind of intense," Maya admitted. "But remember, Earth's gravity is about twice what you're used to here, and our atmosphere has enough oxygen to literally corrode metal. Plus, there's all the wildlife that wants to kill you, natural disasters, extreme weather patterns." She trailed off, noticing everyone staring at her. "What?" That's when it finally clicked for all of us. The term Deathworld wasn't just some dramatic classification. It was a literal description of a planet so hostile that its inhabitants had to become living weapons just to survive childhood. Maya wasn't primitive. She was the end product of millions of years of evolutionary pressure that would have exterminated any other species in the galaxy. Every human was essentially a biological war machine, and they didn't even realize it because to them, this was just normal. My wounded pride was slowly being replaced by something that felt disturbingly like respect. And underneath that respect was a growing sense of terror at what humanity might be capable of when they actually tried to hurt someone. After all, everything Maya had done so far was just reflex. 3 months later, the Galactic Combat Academy had implemented what they diplomatically called enhanced safety protocols for Deathworld species integration. In reality, this meant that human students were no longer required to use the same restraining equipment as other species. Instructor discipline guidelines had been completely rewritten, and the medical bay had tripled its staff. I returned to active duty with a jaw that clicked when it rained and a completely revised understanding of what the term primitive actually meant. My first official act was to personally apologize to Maya Torres for my behavior. My second was to request reassignment to non-combat instruction because frankly I wasn't sure my ego could handle another lesson in human capabilities. Maya, for her part, seemed genuinely surprised by all the fuss. She'd settled into academy life with disturbing ease, and the other cadets had stopped treating her like a fragile curiosity. Instead, they now approached her with the same careful respect usually reserved for unstable explosives or senior instructors having bad days. The story of our encounter spread through the galactic military networks like a plasma fire through dry vegetation. Within weeks, every major species had updated their threat assessment protocols for humans. The phrase, "it's just a human," had been permanently retired from military vocabulary and replaced with, "it's a human." Proceed with extreme caution. Request applications for the Human Exchange Program quadrupled overnight. Maya graduated top of her class, naturally. She broke 17 academy records, redefined 3 fundamental combat techniques, and somehow managed to do it all while maintaining that same calm, patient demeanor that had driven me insane months earlier. During the graduation ceremony, as I watched her receive the Academy's highest honors, I reflected on the cosmic joke we'd all been living. We'd spent centuries believing that advanced technology and refined training methods made us superior warriors. Meanwhile, an entire species had been casually producing individuals who could dismantle our best fighters using nothing but childhood reflexes and creative applications of physics. The truly terrifying part, Maya Torres wasn't even considered particularly exceptional by human standards. She was just a regular girl from Earth who thought it might be fun to see how aliens fought. If this was what humans considered average, I shuddered to think what their actual warriors were capable of. As Maya walked across that stage to accept her commendation, I caught her eye one final time. She smiled and gave me a small wave. I waved back, very carefully keeping my hands well away from my face. Some lessons, after all, only need to be learned once.